Hello learners, today we will begin with one new topic. Although a glimpse of this topic we had already in our previous lessons. So let us begin the topic sources of finance. When we say sources of finance, that means all those avenues from which a company or a business organization can arrange the funds to finance their assets. So sources of finance are typically we will be discussing about a limited liability company or for a company form of business organization. So before proceeding further, I'll just explain you in brief what a company is. Limited liability company. A limited liability company is an association of large number of people in which these people contribute the money to do some business activity for having the gain. And the investors or the people who are contributing the money, they contribute the money in the form of shares. So share is the smallest unit to represent the total capital of the organization. And the moment a person buys the shares, he becomes the shareholder, and shareholder of the company is the owner of the company. When we say shareholder is the owner, definitely he bears the risk also. He has the risk of losing his money. At the same time, he can get the gain also. So that is the definition of a company, although we have a legal definition of a company also. Now the capital contribution by the contributor is in the form of a share, hence they are called shareholders. Now what are the features of a limited liability company? When we say limited liability company, it means liability of the shareholders is limited up to the value of shares purchased by them. They are not responsible to contribute in the losses of the company if there are the losses in the company. That means to say, if someone has purchased shares of 10,000 rupees in a company, he has paid 10,000. Now in the future, if company earns the profit, he might get a dividend, or if company runs into losses, company goes into bankruptcy, he will not participate in the losses. So despite of the fact that he is owner, but his liability is limited up to the value of shares purchased by him. We can quickly see these, although this is just a glimpse. Legal separate entity. So every company has its own legal entity. Like you and me have a legal entity, company also has a legal entity. It can sign an agreement with someone, someone else can negotiate with the company. Limited liability of the owners, I have already explained. Separation of ownership and management. That means to say, in a company, shareholders may be crores, millions, trillions, but who are managing the company? Board of directors. So board of directors are the representatives of the shareholders of the company. They manage the company, and at the end of the year, they provide the information or feedback to the owners, that is shareholders, that yes, this is what we did in the year and that is what the result of that particular year. And this is going to be the future for our company. So there is a separation between ownership and management. Ownership and management. Then capital represented by shares, risk sharing by large number of shareholders. It means if you do a business as a sole entrepreneur, you are the one who will bear the risk, and sole entrepreneur has unlimited liability. That means to say, in case of a sole enterprises, and same thing is applicable for partnership, that if you are doing partnership business, your liability is unlimited. That means if you are doing business in those two forms, sole enterprises or partnership, liability of the owner is unlimited. That particular thing implies that if business assets are not sufficient to repay business liabilities, then the personal property of the owner can be used to fulfill the losses of business organization. So that is the meaning of unlimited. But in case of limited liability company, liability of the shareholders is limited only. So that is there. Then more risky part, shareholders have residual claim, plight of the equity shareholders. Despite of the fact that equity shareholders are the owner of the company, but they are the last one to get the chunk in the profit. That means if company has a profit, it will be first of all distributed to the preference shareholders, and they will be the last one, and that too subject to the provision if it is recommended and declared by the board of directors. So there have been certain incidences when company has good profit but there is no dividend to the shareholders. And just to give a recap, dividend is that part of the profit which is distributed among shareholders as reward to them. Similarly, if company goes into winding up, closing down, after paying all the legal dues, whatever money is left out, first it will be paid to the money lenders or bondholders, then preference shareholders, and last chance will be for the equity shareholders. So they are the claimant for leftovers. And last one, closing down of a company is always through a legal procedure. That means a company comes into existence through a legal procedure, and if it has to be closed down or winded up, it will be through a legal procedure. So that are the features of a limited liability company. Structure wise, we can classify the limited liability company into two. These are the prominent two structures. These are the prominent two structures, public limited company and private limited company. Give a pause and think, what is a public limited company and what is a private limited company? So we get different answers in our regular class from the learners. But yes, I'll tell you what is a public limited company and what is a private limited company. Public limited company is the one which can be started by minimum 7 promoters. It has the privilege of inviting general public through mass media to contribute towards the capital of the company. Whereas private limited company can be started by 2 people, but it cannot invite general public to contribute towards the capital of the company by using mass media. So one difference, number of promoters. 7 in case of public limited company is must, 2 in case of private limited company is must. Then another difference, public limited company can come out with an advertisement to invite general public to contribute towards the capital of the company, whereas private limited company is not allowed to do that. Another thing, shares of the public limited company are freely transferable. That means if you buy the shares of a public limited company today, next day you can sell it. But in case of private limited company, there might be some restriction on the free transfer of the shares. And the last distinction, in case of private limited, maximum number of shareholders can be 50. So in case of private limited company, maximum number of shareholders can be 50, but for a public limited company, there is no such limit. So that is the major distinction between public limited company and private limited company. And the last distinction, which makes much more difference for the shareholders, shares of the public limited company are available for buying and selling on stock exchange, provided these have been issued through an IPO or FPO. So the moment a public limited company issues IPO or FPO or issues shares through IPO and FPO, these are available for buying and selling on the stock exchange. Whereas shares of a private limited company are not available for buying and selling on the stock exchange. Only thing, if you are holding shares of a private limited company, you can go to anyone individually, convince him and sell it, or you can buy from someone who has it. These are not available for buying and selling on the floor of a stock exchange through the brokers of the stock exchange. So one common thing goes, the companies which are already listed means the companies whose shares are bought and sold on the stock exchange, they all are public limited company. So that is the distinction between public limited company and private limited company. The recent change is that we can have one-person company also, one-person private limited company. That is the recent change. Now, the core part. After discussing the limited liability company, how a limited liability company will arrange the finances. What are the sources of finance available for a limited liability company? To quickly have a look at this. We can have two kinds of capital of a company, which is the backbone of the company, owner's capital or owner's equity, and borrowed capital or debt capital. Owner's equity means the money contributed by the shareholders in the organization or the retained profits belonging to the shareholders, that both put together become the owner's capital, because equity shareholders are the owners of the company. Whereas borrowed capital is the money which is borrowed by the company either in the form of a loan or by issuing the debentures or the bonds. So a debenture is a kind of loan issued by the company to the public to gather the money, to borrow the money. So we can say a debenture or a bond is taking a loan from the mass public in general. A public limited company can come out with the initial public offering or FPO, follow on public offering. So whenever in the lifetime of a company, if a company comes first time with its issue of the equity shares, it will be IPO, and subsequently that may be FPO. Now, another benefit to the equity shareholders is, although in case of equity shares, if you are buying the equity shares of the company, there is no commitment by the company to pay you dividend. But yes, if company is earning good profits, dividends might be given at an exorbitant rate. At the same time, companies might give bonus shares also. Bonus shares are the one which are issued to equity shareholders free of cost. So it means bonus shares are given to existing equity shareholders. Debenture holders are not entitled for the bonus shares. Preference shareholders are not entitled for the bonus shares. When we say sources of capital for a company, it means either equity shares or debentures or preference shares. All can be grouped into long-term sources and short-term sources. So within long-term sources, we have owner's capital and borrowed capital. Owner's capital is represented by equity share capital and retained earning and preference shares, whereas borrowed capital by debentures or long-term loan. In short term, I have kept it commercial paper and bills of exchange. However, short-term debentures can also be there. Now, what is an equity share? An equity share entitles the holder of the share for the ownership right. When we say ownership rights, he has the right to cast his vote in the meeting of shareholders. And as you know, ultimate owner of the company are shareholders. Even the board of directors, managing director and the CEO are responsible or liable or answerable to equity shareholders. So equity shareholders are the owner of the company. They will cast their vote in the meeting of shareholders to decide the fate of the company, to take the major decision about the company. On equity shares, we do not promise, or there is no promise of fixed dividend, but there are the chances of getting extra dividend, high rate of dividend or bonus. Equity shares don't have any kind of maturity period. That means once you buy the equity shares of the company, you cannot go back to the company saying back, give me back my money and take your shares. Never possible. However, of late, we have a provision of buyback of the shares. But that too, it is a systematic. And another part is, if company wants to buy back, it can buy back certain quantum of shares, not all the shares, not all the shares. So that is the way. Buyback of the share is another way, but it is not in the hands of shareholders. So that is the equity shareholders. And equity shareholders, as specified earlier also, are the claimant for the residue. That means they have the residual claim. Just contrast to that, we have preference shares. Preference shares are the one on which company promises a fixed percentage of dividend subject to the availability of profits. It means to say, if company has sufficient profits, then only dividend will be paid on the preference shares at a fixed percentage. And when we say preference, it means they will get the dividend before it is paid to the equity shareholders. In general, preference shares have got a fixed maturity also, which means at the end of that maturity period, capital or money of the shareholders will be returned back to them. So that is the major distinction between equity shares and the preference shares. Retained earning. Such earning which is not distributed among shareholders but withheld in the company, retained in the company for reinvestment purpose. Ultimately, it belongs to equity shareholders. Then comes debentures. In the previous classes, we have seen in detail different types of debenture. So, I will just define a debenture. A debenture is a kind of loan taken by the company from general public. The major concept in the debenture is that on every debenture, company is bound to pay a fixed percentage of interest as promised by the company at the time of issue of the debenture. So, debentures always carry a fixed coupon rate. So, coupon rate is the interest rate associated with the debenture on which company is bound to pay the interest whether company earns the profit or not. It means payment of interest on debenture is legal and contractual obligation for the company. Debentures may be redeemable or convertible. Debentures may be deep discount bonds or zero coupon bond. All those features we have seen in the earlier classes. You can refer to those classes and revise that particular part. But yes, if you ask me the ranking, when company is to be closed down, all the legal claims have been paid and now we are disposing of the assets and three claimants are left out: debenture holders, preference shareholders and equity shareholders. So, first priority will be for the debenture or loan, second priority will be preference shareholders and last priority will be equity shareholders. That is why we say equity shareholders have the residual claim. They are claimant for the residue. So, that is long-term source of capital. Now, if I say debenture can also be short-term source of capital, yes. It can be medium-term source of capital also, yes. Only thing, duration or maturity of the debenture will be low. 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, medium term and short term. So, in general, year up till 1 year is short term, year from 1 to 5 year is medium term and beyond 5 years is long term. However, for the companies within short term, we have commercial papers and bills of exchange. Commercial papers are issued by the companies who have got the good credit rating and permission from the RBI to issue the commercial paper. Commercial papers are issued at a discount to par value or face value and redeemed at par on maturity. And maturity of these generally does not exceed 1 year. On these, there is no provision for payment of interest. Rather, these are issued at a discount to face value and redeemed at par on maturity. These are in the form of negotiable instruments. So, all these things, equity shares, preference shares, debentures, commercial papers, they are in the form of negotiable instrument, and even the bills of exchange, Now, so that is the commercial paper. For short-term need of the money, finances, companies do issue the commercial paper. And bills of exchange, that is prominently for working capital financing. A bills of exchange is simply an instrument through which a company can arrange the funds. So, with the help of bills of exchange, company converts its receivables into bills of exchange, and those bills of exchange, bills receivable can be discounted with the bank to arrange the finance. So, a bill of exchange is acceptance from the other person to pay the money. That means in a bill of exchange, one person who has sold the goods, he gives an order to the other person, that is the buyer of the goods, that please pay us or our order so much amount after so much period for consideration received. And that particular bill is simply a draft. The moment it is accepted by the acceptor, it becomes bills of exchange. So, after accepting, the acceptor will send it back to the drawer. So, the drawer is the one who is writing the bill, drawee or acceptor is the one who is accepting the bill. So, buyer will accept it, seller will write it. Now, bill will come back to the seller. For seller, it becomes bills receivable. Now, if suppose maturity of the bill is 90 days. So, that person who is holding the bill, the seller, need not to wait for 90 days. Because actual buyer will pay after 90 days. He can today go to the bank, after 1 month he can go to a bank and ask for the discounting of the bill. So bank will deduct their interest charges or discount charges upfront and pay the money to the holder of the bill. Now bill is with bank. On the maturity of the bill, bank will go to the acceptor of the bill, demand the payment. If acceptor of the bill, that is Dravi, makes the payment, well and good, things are settled, deal is closed. On the contrary, if Dravi does not make the payment, then bank need not to worry. Bank need not to worry. Bank will come back to the original person, that is the seller of the goods, who had got the bill discounted, claim the full amount of the bill. Now case is between original parties, that is writer of the bill and the Dravi of the bill. So in that way, bills of exchange offers short-term source of finance. Now when we were talking about equity shares issue or debentures issue, fundraising mechanism is also required to be known. A company can issue the equity shares or debentures by using any of these mechanisms: public issue, private placement, rights issue, public issue through book building. So I have written public issue twice. The first public issue means public issue at fixed price. Now when we say public issue may be IPO or FPO. In a public issue, company is inviting general public through mass media by giving an advertisement, open advertisement, that yes, those who are interested, they can apply to the company to buy the shares of the company. All the rules and regulation, all the provisions and conditions are specified by the company in the offer letter or prospectus to the issue. These all activities are regulated by Securities and Exchange Board of India. So in a public issue at fixed price, company will decide the issue price, the price at which shares have to be issued, well in advance, the day issue is announced. If you are interested to buy, you can buy, apply for the shares and get it, otherwise not. On the other hand, public issue through book building means company is inviting general public through mass media to buy the shares of the company, but company does not specify the final issue price. They give a range. Let us say shares will be issued at a price between 800 to 816, 800 to 810. So if you are interested to buy, you can give your bidding between 800 to 810, whatever price, upper band and lower band is decided by the company. Now, if you are interested, you will apply. So maximum investors who are applying for the public issue through book building, they apply at the cutoff price. Cutoff price means the price at which shares are issued under a public issue through book building. So once company receives the application, they decide upon the cutoff price. And on that cutoff price, all the applicants who have made the application or made the bid at a price equal to or greater than the cutoff price, they are eligible to get the share. And those who have not applied for the price, who have applied for the price below the cutoff rate, they are not eligible for that. So those who are applying at a price or making a bid at a price equal to or more than the cutoff price are eligible applicants to get the shares in the public issue. So in a public issue, whether it may be first and the last, fixed price issue or book building, we are inviting, companies inviting general public to buy the shares of the company. Whereas private placement. Private placement means companies going to different investors, banks, HNIs, UHNIs, individually explaining their project and soliciting the contribution towards the capital. And generally, private placement mode of raising the capital is exercised by private limited company, because a private limited company is not allowed to go public. One more thing, a reminder, the moment a company goes public, and only public limited company can go public, number one, the moment shares are issued through a public issue, these must be available for buying and selling on the stock exchange. That means these must be listed on the stock exchange. Then the last one, rights issue. Rights issue means offering the shares to existing equity shareholders exactly in the proportion of holding they have. exactly in the proportion of shares held by them. So rights issue is targeted only on the existing equity shareholders and none others, none other. So these are some of the modes through which fundraising can be done by the company. So that is IPO versus FPO. Now whatever we have discussed so far, they are the conventional modes of raising the funds. They are conventional sources of funding. We have something called a non-conventional source of finance also. And non-conventional is lease financing, hire purchase and factoring services. So let us quickly see what these things are. Now what is lease financing? Lease financing is an agreement between two parties whereby owner of the asset gives his asset to other party, that is user, for using the asset for a definite period of time, and in return the owner of the asset gets the lease rent. So it is something like you are giving your asset on rent to someone, other person will use it for a specified use and a specified period, and he will give you the rent over that period. So that is particularly a lease agreement. In the lease agreement, owner of the asset never sells his assets. He is giving it only on rent, on lease only. User of the asset known as lessee, owner of the asset is known as lessor. So lessor retains the ownership right, lessee has the right to use the asset as per the terms and condition specified by the owner. And in return what owner is getting, what lessor is getting, lease rental over the lease period. And these are the different types of leases. These are the different types of leases. Then we have factoring. Factoring agreement. Factoring is basically used for financing the working capital. In a factoring agreement, one company who has sold the goods on credit, they sell their receivables to an outside agency called as factor. We have PNB factor, CanBank factor and all that. Many more are there in private sector. So seller who has sold the goods on credit, he sells his receivables to the factor and gets the money from that particular factor, so that all the management work, maintenance of accounts and collection of the receivables is done by that factor. So a factoring agency is the one who provides advance against the receivables factored, as well as provides the services of maintaining the records, follow up with the customers to pay the money. Now on the maturity of the receivables, remaining payment will be settled. So let us say receivables of 100 crore are factored and 80 crore is received as an advance. Definitely factor will charge interest on that 80 crore also. So 80 crore is given as an advance, remaining 20 crore will be given back. Remaining 20 crore will be given back on the maturity of the receivables. So by the end of the maturity of the receivables, factor will collect the money from the receivables, deduct his interest charges and pay the remaining amount to the company who had sold the receivables. So factoring arrangement or factoring services is of two types. In one case, the factor is providing full-fledged service. That means he is providing advance also, he is providing accounts maintenance service as well as collection of the receivables. In some cases, factor might not provide the advance. He says, I will not provide you any advance, but I will follow up with the customers, I will maintain the record, collect the money and give it to you. So that is a factoring service. Factoring services may be recourse factoring versus non-recourse factoring. When we say recourse factoring, the factor is not responsible for the bad debts resulting from the receivables. In case of non-recourse, factor says I am ready to accept the bad debts also. That means original seller need not to worry about the bad debts also. Advance factoring versus maturity factoring, I have already explained. Full factoring, that means a factoring arrangement in which it is non-recourse as well as advance. Both the features are clubbed. Bank participating factoring. Generally what happens, if a seller who has got receivables of 100 crore assigns the receivables, so selling the receivables is also called as assigning the receivable, assigns the receivables to a factor, factor will leave a margin. So let us say factor is giving only 70% advance. Then the original seller who has got the receivables, who is assigning the receivables, he can go to a bank to procure the finance for the gap left by the factor, that is 30%. So in that case, it will be bank participating factoring. And we can have cross-border factoring also, in which factor of the exporter country will be involved, factor of the importer's country will be involved. That means two factors will be there. So that is done in import-export business. So this is the way non-conventional sources are used. This is the way non-conventional sources are used. So dear learners, we have learnt about different sources of finance, conventional and non-conventional. I hope you could understand the concept. Keep on learning. Thanks a lot for giving me your time.